is almost always, not always, but almost always, the constraint is a budget constraint. So, all I'm doing right now is simply repeating what I said 2 lectures ago. This will be lecture 15, correct? Lecture 15, Managerial Economics. We continue with the topic of optimal decisions. And with an optimal decisions, we covered last time unconstrained optimization. Now we do constraint optimization. In the budget constraint, the budget constraint itself is a constraint imposed by business reality on the total cost or the total expenditure of a business. So sometimes we can just say that total cost equals, simply because this is the budget that we have, total cost equals what? Cost 1 times the first quantity plus cost 2 times second quantity plus cost cost 3 times the third quantity plus plus the cost k, quantity k, alright? So this is it simply says that the dealer has exactly, let's say, $1 million budget, and with that $1 million budget, he will have to fill up the parking lot, alright? So, is he going to put in Chevy Cavaliers or is he going to put in Porsches, alright? And the eventual answer, of course, is that the marginal benefit must eventually equal the marginal cost. But now we get a new little twist, which is called per dollar. And this is what I'm going to be explaining in a few minutes. Alright. So, first of all, is the general concept that a Chevy, for example, is cheap, but brings relatively little value, and that a Porsche is expensive but is also fun, right? The Chevy is boring, right? So, turns out that the Porsche is worth what? 5 times more, right? So the Porsche is 5 times more expensive than the Chevy, alright? Well, how much more fun is it? 10 times more fun, alright? So, 10 times more fun, this essentially means, and the way we say that you get more fun for your dollars. You get more fun for your dollars. In other words, you pay 5 times more, but you get 10 times more fun. The essential idea is very simple. You get twice more fun for the money that you spend. Of course, the tricky part here with the argument, which people don't usually accept, is that the Porsche is actually a luxury good, right? But in the world of business, this is exactly how it works. It works like this. Again, real business. How much is a Chevy making as a profit to the, let's say, car dealer? How much? How much profit, net profit?
Compared to the Porsche?
Oh, just a Chevy Cavalier. It costs $10,000. How much does it cost to the dealer to acquire it from the manufacturer? 9. So the profit in this particular case, it is like a sales margin, because it's a dealer, it's a car dealer. Sales margin is the cost of acquiring the car versus the cost of selling it later, of course, minus all discounts, incentives, and everything else. So the profit, which is like a sales margin, sales margin is, let's say, $1,000. Okay, well, Porsche selling for what? The Porsche sells for what? 50,000, right? Well, what will be the dealer's profit on a Porsche? How much?
What's
5,000?
5,000?
10,000, 1,000.
More like more like 3,000. In other words, 6,000 or 7,000 is way too much. If the dealer is making 6,000, it will be very easy for the dealer next door or 2 dealerships out to immediately lower the price by 1,000, lower his profit by 1,000. So instead of selling it for 6 profit, he will eagerly sell it for 5 because 5 is still an awful lot of money. Alright? In other words, because there is competition between different dealers or sellers of a Porsche, usually competition will drive down. But of course, it cannot drive it down to 1,000. Who will be dumb enough to try to sell one Porsche for 1,000 where he can sell it, for 1,000 profit, where he can sell in the same time maybe 10 Chevy Cavaliers, right? Maybe 10 Chevy Cavaliers for a lot more profit, all right? So here the idea is that, of course, competition will drive the profit way less than 6,000 or possibly 5,000, but the profitability will be still well above 1,000. And a reasonable number is 3. Reasonable number is 3,000, okay? So, if he has to buy only once if he has to buy per month, and he has certain budget constraints, how much Chevys and how much Porsches is he going to buy?
One Porsche, maybe 2 Chevy.
So he has spots for 100 cars. In other words, here the budget constraint is not $1 million. Here the budget constraint is completely different. You can have 100 cars because if you're a dealer, you have a parking lot, and the parking lot usually, you gotta put your cars inside, and in many countries in the world, it is illegal for a dealer to park and sell cars outside the dealership. That's how it works, okay? So, you got capacity for 100 cars, and that's it.
The Porsches would be 3 times as much as
No, it's
the Chevys would be 3 much.
It depends on the demand of the cars.
Oh, okay, so it will depend on the demand. Now, what I already imputed in this computation is that you will have sufficient demand to sell at this profit, or you will have sufficient demand to sell at this profit.
If I don't have a budget constraint, I can buy Porsche and
only
give more.
Oh, there you have it. That's the perfect answer. If you do not have a budget constraint in dollar terms, you buy all 100 will be Porsches. That's it. All 100 will be Porsches. Simple as that. Does it make perfect sense? Right. So all 100, rather than making 100,000, we're going to make 300,000. And now comes the next.
It's more expensive, so what's you're going to get less cars, so
No. Here's the one thing. I put in here a
you're gonna buy
constraint of 100 cars that you can acquire this month, simply because you can have only 100 cars. And I also said you acquire the cars once a month. So, in other words, you can have 100 cars. If you can sell them all, you're going to have all Porsches because you're going to be making 3 times more per car. But there was no technically budget constraint. Now, what would happen if you have a 1 million constraint? If you have a 1 million constraint, so you have 1 million constraint. What's next? What's the next step? You just say, hey, let's fill it up with Porsches nevertheless. What's the result? You can't. Why can't we?
Because of the price of the Porsches, the cost of the Porsches.
What's the argument? So you can't just say because it's too expensive. Because what?
Because not all people will buy Porsches, buy an expensive.
No.
I have fixed
No.
costs because of the capacity. I already have fixed costs. I should use the capacity.
So here is the next argument. We should probably try to use the capacity. In other words, a Porsche costs $50,000. With a 1 million limit, I will be able to buy barely 20. Barely 20. So, this month, I will be able to buy 20. This means that 80% of a parking lot will be empty. I won't be making money on the 80% of the parking lot. I'll be making only 20. And what else? I'll be making 20 cars at 3,000.
The profit will be less.
The profit will be less than what? Than what?
Optimum.
The optimum. What's the optimum now?
The maximum profit.
What's the maximum?
300,000.
Oh, 300,000. How do we get to 300,000? What do we? We can't get to
Yeah, because we
300,000.
have the 1 million.
We have the 1 million limit. We can't. So what's the
Why
maximum?
some of the...
20.
Oh, so it may turn out to be more profitable to fill up with some Chevys, right? So we put in 10 Porsches, the rest are Chevys, right? So we begin to develop a table. We just call it a schedule. Of course, we can draw charts and graphs, but the idea is that it's a lot easier to see this way. So the alternative, so what we have here is 1 million, and let's try, this is Chevy, this is a Porsche, and you have 1 million. And we simply look at what's going on. I mean, the simplest way to do is just come up with a couple of combinations. The first combination is 20 Porsches and 0 Chevys, right? In this particular case, we make a profit of 20 times 3,000 is, what is it? 60,000. Right? We usually like to put in K for 1,000. Well, what's the next alternative? The next alternative will be, let's say, 15 Porsches. If we get 15 Porsches, how many Chevys do we get?
5. 45. More than 5.
How much is the Chevy?
Chevy is 10,000. Chevy is 10,000 and the Porsche is 50,000. So we cut down on 5 Porsches, and 1 Porsche equals 5 Chevys. 5 Chevys. Again, this is what we call opportunity cost, right? The opportunity cost of 1 Porsche is 5 Chevys. And the opportunity cost of a Chevy is 1/5 of a Porsche. So right now I can throw in 25 Chevys. What is my total profit now? 45 and 25. How much is it? 45 and 25, 70. You see what's going on now?
Yeah.
All right, so let's try 10. 10, what's going to be here? 15. What's the profitability doing right now? Hmm?
80.
Oh, it becomes 80. So we're making 10 times 3, 30,000 profit out of the Porsches and 50 out of the Chevys. So 80. So turns out that as we increase the number of Chevys versus the Porsches, right, we actually increase the total profits. Okay, and we move to 5 and to 0, and effectively these are the combinations because we're moving here to 75, and then we're moving to 100, and over here the profitability will be 90,000, and finally over here the profitability will be 100,000.
So no Porsches.
No Porsches, right? So, in other words,
So the demand for the Porsche is very low. That's
okay, wait a minute.
We didn't talk about
I never, ever mentioned a word about demand for Porsches. All I mentioned was that if the dealership has them, they will be sold at this one.
What about the
If he has one, he'll sell it. If he has 20, he'll sell them. If he has 12, he'll sell them. I never said anything about the Porsches, all right? And I never said anything about the demand for the Chevys. All I said, here's a tiny little dealer in the big city of Riyadh, and it doesn't matter if he has 1 or 12. He's too small. As many as he has, he'll sell them at these sales margins, all right? So, forget about demand.
What about the cost compared to the profits? The percentage of the profit compared to the
Again, this is exactly what I'm explaining. This is already the net benefit. The net benefit here, net benefit here, okay? You see? So we have a net benefit. In other words, this is 10,000 revenue versus 9,000 cost for the dealer. And this is 50,000 revenue versus 47,000. And all I'm explaining is something completely different. If you do not have any budget constraints, as we started out, the dealer's optimal quantity is only Porsches and no Chevys. On the other hand, when you impose 1 million, budget constraint, the optimal solution is only Chevys and no Porsche. So, the idea is now completely different. When you constrain by costs, suddenly the optimal solution becomes very different. In other words, the optimal solution that has no constraint is or could be very different. In this particular case, totally different. Totally different. In this particular case, you can increase the profitability from 60 to 100,000. Now, remember what else happened. If you had no constraints, what was the total profit with Porsches only? The total profit, no constraint. 300,000. In other words, with no constraints in Porsches only, you make 300,000. With constraint and Porsches only, you get barely 60. But with the constraint, you could re-optimize, switch some Porsches out, and actually get down to 100. In other words, the budget constraint necessarily lowered your profitability, your total profit. But the optimal solution is no longer the same. Porsches only. Alright? Well, so here is the next thing to think about. Again, this is very crude, but in the world of business, this is the correct logic. He really needed how much money? He really needed how much money? The dealer. In order to have no constraint.
5 million.
Yes, he really needed 5 million. So, if the dealer has 5 million, the budget constraint is not limiting him. Now, the parking lot is limiting him. So, he should have 5 million in order to maximize the total profit. But the problem is, he's got only 1. So, you lower his budget 5 times, and his profitability will fall only 3 times. The reason the profitability falls less is that he will now change a little bit the car mix, Chevy, Porsche, and he will have a little bit more optimal than before. In other words, he will optimize. So profitability will, of course, the overall profitability will fall. All right? Is that fairly clear so far? Question you had?
I was just going to say, if he bought with the 5 million,
Okay.
he bought them all Chevys, he's going to gain more, right? Profit?
No, he's not going to gain more. If he had...
How much was the Chevy? I mean, it's
He
cost
only has 100
less.
cars.
Okay.
Is it the cost?
If he has 5 million.
He can still only buy
No, I
100
mean, yeah,
cars.
but he didn't have constraint on the cars.
But I already imposed the constraint, okay?
I'm just asking.
All right, if he has 5 million and has no constraint on the quantity of cars, then again, Chevys only will become the most profitable. Only Chevys will become the most profitable. So, now I explain again, this is a little bit ahead in the textbook, but now what I just explained is, now you have budget constraints. Well, I gave you right now 2 budget constraints, right? One is 1 million for those, and the other one is Chevys plus Porsches must equal 100. And here is the next concept. The next concept is that of, let's see, oh, I forgot it. So, budget constraint, it's called limiting constraints. Alright? If he has a budget of 6 million, then only the parking lot is a limiting constraint, right? This one, if it has 6 million, then it's not a limit, alright? On the other hand, if he has half a million, if he has half a million, then the parking lot is not a constraint. With half a million, he can't fill it up, even with the cheapest car. Alright, so you have limiting constraints. When the budget is over 5 million, limiting constraint is the parking lot. Alright? When you have a budget of 1 million, the parking lot is not a limiting constraint. So, you always have to think when you're in business, which is the real limiting constraint. Usually you have 2. So, here is the trick. I chose 5 million and then it is not a limiting. Well, what if the dealer had only 3 million? So, the dealer has 3 million available. And then the answer is somewhere in the middle, right? Somewhere in the middle will be the optimal solution. Correct?
Yeah.
Alright, so Porsche's 20. So if he has 3 million, he can actually get 60 Porsches, right? And the other 40s will be Chevy or whatever the math is. In other words, if you have in between 1 million, if you have 1 million, the solution is only Chevys. If you have 5 million, the solution is only Porsches. If you have 3 million, the solution will be a whole bunch of Chevys, and you still fill up the dealership with Porsches, right? You still fill up. In other words, if you have little money, you will be using more Chevys. Why? Because the Chevy is more profitable per dollar. In other words, if you have only $50,000 and you use only Chevy, your profit with 50,000 is how much? Is 5. And if you use only Porsche, your profit is 3. So, as long as you have a strict limit on the money, on the budget, you will be using mostly Chevys. On the other hand, if you are limited by the number of cars, in other words, the parking lot is getting full, then the optimal solution is get the Chevy out because you're making only 1,000 and replace it with a Porsche in, as long as you have the money to do it. Alright? Does it make perfect sense? Well, I'm done with constraint optimization. Is this what it is? Alright, let's do some of the general stuff. If you understood this example, you're on the road to running businesses profitably. Is it on, right? Okay, so let's see a number of things. First of all, in the real world, come on, two of you girls, please.
Sorry.
It's not the time now. If you have a question, ask me. If it's between the two of you, you resolve it after.
I have a question.
Please go ahead, that's why I'm
I don't know
here.
where I'm heading, but like, if we bought with 5 million,
Okay. Only Porsches will be the
wait,
optimal.
is the time a matter? I mean, if we bought like 100 cars,
All right.
okay, and of Chevys,
Yeah.
and then there's still money. I still have money, right?
Okay.
So I'll buy when I finish the 100 cars. I go and buy again Chevys.
Right, I mean,
No,
the next
I mean,
month. Yes,
so-
the next month you do the same exercise
At the
over
end,
again.
don't I have more profit at the end? I mean,
Well, remember.
does time matter? I don't know.
Yeah. Does time matter? Of course. Time
No.
is the most important resource that a manager has. The two most important resources in economics are time and money. That's it. All right? Time does matter. The whole idea here was that this is for one particular period, maybe 1 month, or maybe 1 year. It doesn't
So
matter.
as a manager, you just think about this period. You don't think of.
Well, no. The idea is that the 100-car lot is already limiting you anyway.
Yeah, but
So you're thinking about this period, correct? Yes.
Yeah.
Of course. The other way to think about is, when I started first on, is it optimal to open a second parking lot and have 100 more cars? Would it be better? Okay? In other words, for this period, you work within your constraints, whatever they are. But if you really want to change completely the nature of the business, meaning open a second dealership or an extra parking lot so that you have capacity instead of 100 with 200, now we're into a completely different world. the world
but
of
are you
capital.
sure you're gonna sell all these 200 cars in the matter of the same?
All I'm saying is it requires a completely different analysis. We call this capital budgeting. You will have to make a marketing research. Based on the marketing research, you will find out if you can sell them or if you cannot sell them, if you can out-compete your competitors or if you cannot out-compete the competitors. You will find out what your cost will be, and you will make a proper business decision on the profitability of your second dealership. Of course, it will cost you 1 million just to open the dealership, right? You have to buy the land or rent the land. You have to put in, the fence and everything else. It takes capital. It is the same decision as the university. Should we build an extra little building so that we have the capacity to handle 150 and 200 students, as opposed to being able to handle at most 100? Again, expanding capacity, which requires capital investment and is a multi-period decision, is a completely different subject of what we're just trying to do here. All I'm just trying to do is very simple stuff. You got two constraints: number of cars and some money. What is the optimal solution? Remember, this course is meant to be for MBA students who entered the program 4 weeks ago, right? 4 weeks ago. I have only 4 weeks of experience. And we're trying to solve a fairly basic business problem. What you're asking is usually for the last semester, 4 weeks before you graduate, in order to answer it properly, all right? So what you're asking is infinitely more complicated question, and what I'm trying to do is still explain the basics. The idea is that this type of stuff is usually taught to an engineer, a chemist, or some other profession who's never had business background and experience, whose only background is 4 weeks into an MBA. We're trying to do the elementary stuff today. Alright? Is it clear? So, you may have in the business constraint number 1. Possibly you may have a second constraint. And possibly you may have a third constraint. And potentially you can have a full set of constraints. M constraints. That's perfectly realistic. One set of constraints for the university is number of rooms. We got so many rooms. Second set of constraints is professors. You can get only so many professors. Sure, the university could bring in an adjunct professor from King Saud University, maybe a second one, but overall, the university can't just do this and double the number of professors in finance. Next to impossible, right? From 7, you could increase to 8, possibly push it to 9, right? But otherwise, so you have a large number of constraints, not just the number of rooms, in this particular case cars, also have capital, whatnot, so a whole number of constraints. That's number 1. Number 2 is usually in the constraint optimization you have 2 or more choice variables. Choice In other words, if we consider you, students, as a choice variable, right? You're the only one choice variable. There's no second choice variable. Do we hire 3 or, admit 3 or 13 or 15, right? There's only one choice variable, number of students. In this particular case, that's because this is the nature of constraint optimization problems. You have 2 choice variables, quantities of Porsche and quantities of Chevy. Well, for our MBA, how many choice variables do we have for our MBA? Huh? MBAs in the world programs usually have 1 choice variable. Number of MBA students. Prince Sultan has 2 choice variables. Male and female, because these are dealt with separately, with separate business decisions, with separate rooms, like separate dealerships. In other words, there was no problem mixing up Chevys and Porsches. No problem. Alright? And then, if you have no problem mixing up Chevys and Porsches, but in this case, no problem, mixing up male and female in Bulgaria. Here's the problem. So suddenly, you actually have 2 completely different choice variables, okay? And of course, the complexity begins to rise immensely because now we have constraint optimization. In other words, suddenly you cannot, again, number of rooms, but you can't mix them up. So you can have only females in a room or only... So yet another constraint in the overall business decision. Alright? So here's an example. In other words, constraint optimization problems typically have 2 or more choice variables. Alright? A constraint optimization problem for the housewife will be, here is 1,000 Rial, go shopping. And she can choose from tomatoes and cucumbers or gold rings, right? In other words, the housewife is given a budget of 1,000 Rial and she can spend it on 1,001 things. And she'll choose what to best spend it on. It's the same in a business. Business can hire 3 professors or 13 professors or whatnot. So this is the next important. Finally, let's see what else. I'm trying to see budget constraints and most of this stuff. There is one other important thing. Which I probably may actually have to explain it. What I did with the Chevys and the Porsches, I did constant net benefit, constant marginal benefit. But of course, marginal benefit can change for Porsches, right? You know, if you fill it up with 100 Porsches, you'll have to lower the price. You can't sell them all for 3,000, all right? So at one point, you'll have to sell them for 2,500. At one point, you have to sell them for 2,000, etc. Have to lower. So the idea is that in this particular case, when you have two choice variables, the optimal solution will be slightly different. And I'm looking here at page 102 for those of you that have a textbook. Is the marginal benefit of A divided by the price of A must equal the marginal benefit of B divided by the price of B. And marginal benefit, again, this is providing a common cost constraint. Providing a common cost constraint. In other words, you can spend only 1 million. If you can spend only 1 million, the optimal solution is when the marginal benefit of A equals, divided by the price of A equals marginal benefit of B divided by the price of B. So, what is the meaning of this? Yeah, we have a few more minutes to complete. What is the meaning? Marginal benefit of B divided by price of B. What's the explanation? How do we interpret it? Well, marginal benefit of A will be, in our case, the Chevys. How much? For a Chevy, it will be a benefit of 1,000, correct? And the price will be 10,000. Now, using the other one for the Porsche, the marginal benefit will be 3,000
Over 50,000.
for the price of 50,000. So, in this particular case, I chose the price to be constant and I chose the marginal benefit to be constant. So this is 1,000, this is 3,000. So in this particular case, if we do not have other constraints, we get a... Yes, let's try this, a new concept. Corner solution. Corner solution. Corner solution is a solution where the optimal solution makes for all of the one and none of the others. In this particular case, if we have a budget of 5 million, you get the corner solution where you get all Porsches and no Chevy. Alright? If the budget is 1 million, you get to the other corner solution of all Chevys and no Porsche. And if you're in between 1 million and 5 million, you will get some other optimal solution of maybe, what is going to be 10 Porsches or whatever is going to be 20 Porsches and is going to be 80 Chevys, right? So, again, usually when one constraint is not binding and the other is completely binding, you usually get corner solutions. I want to get into that. But usually when all constraints are binding, the optimal solution is of this type, where the marginal benefits per dollar, that's how we call it, per dollar, alright? In this particular case, the marginal benefit for the price of this is 0.1, right? So, 1,000 divided by 10,000, the marginal benefit is 0.1. In other words, the marginal benefit is, we call it 10 cents on the dollar. 10 cents on the dollar. In other words, for every dollar in A, we're benefiting 10 cents. Well, how many are we benefiting on a portion? I don't know, 7 or 8. We divide 3 by 5, right? So it's 6 cents on the dollar. Right? Isn't it 6? Right? Come on, guys. You're eager to go home, right?
Yeah.
You're already tired. All right. 3,000 divided by... We divide this, then we multiply by 2. This becomes 6. This becomes 100. So it becomes 6 over 100. This is equal to 6 cents. In other words, the net benefit on a dollar of Chevy is 10 cents on the dollar, right? 10 cents on the dollar. And the net benefit on a dollar of Porsche is 6 cents on the dollar. So, if you do not have...
0.06.
Yes, 0.06. 0.06 dollars. $0.06 is the same as 6 cents on the dollar. Here is equal to 10 cents. 10 cents on the dollar, right? So, if you do not have any other constraints, then invest it all in the... Right. In other words, you already have one binding constraint, and this is 100 cars. If you don't have a different budget constraint, then it is all in the one. All right? On the other hand, if you have no budget constraint here of 5 million, maybe 10 million, maybe 20 million, then you invested it all in an absolute value. In other words, in the one case, you maximize by the absolute value of the profit. The absolute value is 3,000 and 1,000. In the other case, you maximize on the profit per dollar. Profit per dollar. All right? The optimal solution is always satisfying this requirement or a corner solution. In other words, in our Chevy case, this is never satisfied. In other words, it's a corner solution because we can't get this one. All right? Now, if you get other constraints, it's getting more complicated. You have 3, 4, 5. I don't want to deal with multiple constraints. We're too far. Right? And you're too tired, right? All right, so I guess we're done for today, and unfortunately we don't have time to discuss Gordon Brown's next time, right? All right, I promise next time. Gordon Brown. Yeah.